Hello and welcome to this AIM webinar on the state of the AIDC market in 2020. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to go over. First is our antitrust policy. It's the policy of AIM Inc. to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. Next, we have AIM's collaboration and work product policy. This states that presentations like today's are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM's developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. I also want to note that attendees are muted throughout the presentation. If you have a question, our presenter will be answering some of those at the end of the presentation. You can ask questions by chatting those to AIM Member Services, and a recording of this presentation will be made available, and attendees will be notified when this recording is available. Now a little bit about AIM. AIM's an alliance enabling the cooperation, development, and standardization of AIDC technologies. From barcodes to RFID to IoT, AIM is your advocate. Any organization with an interest in data collection is a beneficiary of these efforts. Membership provides an opportunity to influence the direction of the industry, develop policies and standards, access market reports, and engage new partners. As this webinar will be addressing, these are trying times for businesses around the globe. AIM wants those in the AIDC industry to know we are here to help your business. Some ways we do this is with our educational endeavors. AIM members have the opportunity to take part in educational webinars and podcasts like the one being done right now that help the world see and hear your knowledge to those in and around the industry. We also have product showcases which highlight your AIDC solutions and are sent out to over 13,000 industry relevant contacts. And last but definitely not least, AIM has several industry groups that help educate and build the important standards that help truly advance AIDC technologies. Please check out aimglobal.org to learn more about our many initiatives. I would like to take a moment now to thank our sponsors for this webinar. First, Applied Image, who is a global manufacturer of precision imaged optical components and calibration standards. Among the many resources offered by Applied Image is their standard and custom test cards using proprietary AccuEdge technology. Check out appliedimage.com to learn more about that and see shelf life guidelines, measurement and calibration quick reference guide, along with many other barcode test and calibration standards. Our next sponsor is Avery Dennison, which has a long history of innovation for supply chain automation, dating back to the development of the initial barcodes to RFID and now on to the next new emerging data carrier. Avery Dennison understands the requirements of creating globally unique digital identities for physical objects, associating them with a wide variety of triggers to capture that identity. Our next sponsor is Aware Innovations, which offers inventory and asset management solutions. They have intuitive software like Itemware, which is designed to help you make informed decisions. It provides capabilities like asset tracking, work in process tracking, returnable asset tracking, inventory management, and tool tracking. It can be easily integrated with other systems like WMS and ERP systems. Learn more about Aware Innovations hardware and software integration, RFID site surveys, training and support, and more at awareinnovations.com. Our next sponsor, Bartender, transforms data into labels, documents, barcodes, and RFID that drive business. Bartender software enables organizations around the world to improve safety, security, efficiency, and compliance. Go to seagullscientific.com to learn more about how their software creates, automates, and manages printing solutions. Our next sponsor, Bluestar, is a leading innovator in solutions-based distribution for RFID, auto ID, point of sale, mobility, software, and digital signage products. They have over 50 COVID-19 solutions, including wristband printing solutions, which is disinfect ready, have fast loading wristband cartridge, and is up to 6 times more durable than other wristbands. Head over to bluestarinc.com for more information. And last but not least is FIG Electronics. FIG Electronics is a development partner and specialist in contactless identification, electronic control systems, traffic sensor systems, and payment terminals. Based in Germany and with a workforce of over 400, the company contributes to advancements in technology with innovative solutions from a wide range of applications and industries. With the current pandemic, their contactless solutions significantly reduce the risk of infection. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce everyone to our speaker, David Krebs. David is Executive Vice President of Automatic Identification and Data Capture for VDC Research. David is going to be going over the state of the AIDC market, opportunities and challenges with COVID-19 pandemic, the lasting impact on target markets and applications. David, take it away.
Great, thank you, Michael, and thanks to you and Mary Lou and the AIM team for inviting me to, I guess, share a couple of our insights in terms of the research that we're conducting in these, let's just say, very unusual and challenging times. So the three sort of key agenda items or questions that I'm looking to address, and they're big questions, are, first of all, from a, I guess, technology perspective and an industry and application perspective, where are we seeing sort of the greatest impact? And both in terms of headwinds and downside as it relates to COVID-19 and the impact on just overall economic output and performance, as well as the upside, where have we seen acceleration of opportunity, emerging, new solutions, new systems, and new applications, new workflows. Second question, and probably the most difficult one to answer, is around timing and how do we see, essentially us get through this current pandemic and how long or what the lasting impact will be on sort of demand cycles. So we'll share our thinking on that with probably one, two, or three caveats attached to some of those projections. Perhaps the most interesting question is the one of the lasting impact of COVID-19. I think there's been certainly a lot of discussion around what the world looks like, how we go about our businesses, how we interact, how we shop. Once the pandemic is hopefully soon in our rearview mirrors. So we certainly have our opinions on this, and we'll be sharing those part of this discussion as well. And then finally, in terms of sort of the near-term headwinds that we're all facing, that we're all seeing, what are some of the strategies that vendors can adopt to best position themselves moving forward, not only in terms of 2020 and 2021 operations, but also in terms of becoming a better partner, longer-term partner to their customers. Again, beyond 2020, 2021. So maybe a little bit of context. Leading into or coming into 2020, the broader auto ID landscape, if you will, had a fairly robust head of steam, some really nice tailwinds, and there was a lot of activity and a lot of opportunity to be quite excited about. And on top of that, fundamentally speaking, when looking at the overall economy and access to capital and just the way that various industries were performing, especially when compared to the last recession or Great Recession about a decade ago, was fundamentally sound until COVID-19 hit and obviously created havoc across virtually every sector. But some of the themes that we were certainly seeing in our research and we were spending a fair amount of time talking and writing about was certainly the notion of expansion of traceability and serialization initiatives and mandates across multiple product segments. Not a new theme for sure. It's been sort of the work of AIM and its partner organizations for a long time. But even beyond segments like pharmaceuticals, we were seeing, for example, in Russia, mandates around initially alcohol and tobacco products, and now more recently around apparel, footwear, and fur coats, to introduce serialization to address a variety of issues, including anti-counterfeiting, et cetera. And so those efforts were certainly having a keen impact on sort of technology around delivering those capabilities. Certainly, we're in the midst of and continue to be in the midst of shifts in shopping habits and what those were doing in terms of how retailers and their brand partners and their supply chain partners were responding. And we especially saw sort of the appetite and the need for greater visibility, improved visibility, across the entire ecosystem, but in particular amongst retailers, so that they could be more agile in responding to things like ship from store, curbside checkout, and the various services that we see retailers now very quickly trying to roll out. So that appetite for item level visibility was certainly a driving force in a lot of initiatives across a number of product segments. At the same time, we're seeing certainly technology modernization efforts around data capture technology, continued shift towards camera-based and imager-based solutions, the positioning of the camera and the value add that it provides around vision and analytics applications and use cases beyond sort of the traditional sort of barcode reading and item identification. So we saw some really interesting sort of efforts that way, and as well on the mobile estates. I mean, we've been in the midst of a massive upgrade to modern mobile platforms, to Android from legacy Windows that we're still in the midst of, but those drove certainly significant investments, but also significant value across various industry segments. RFID has been certainly a catalyst over the last couple of years, especially with its success in the apparel sector of retail, and now expanding into other segments and other use cases. So momentum behind certainly RFID was well underway going in or leading into 2020, and then the maturation of sort of this notion of sensor fusion value propositions and the embedding of data capture into a variety of non-traditional use cases, be it kiosks, be it medical devices, and other types of ways that customers and consumers are interfacing. So all told, some really interesting and dynamic scenarios that were driving opportunity. Obviously, 2020 hasn't turned out as we certainly expected as we put our forecasts together leading into 2020, and we first started to see that in Q1, early Q1 in Asia, more specifically in China, as COVID first spread there, and the shutdown to a lot of manufacturing and just overall operations coming out of China certainly started to trickle through in terms of investment appetite in that region, and that then quickly obviously accelerated into Europe and then springboarded into North America. And that as here is just a sort of a snapshot in terms of spending patterns and what's happened. We've seen some really drastic shifts in terms of where consumers are spending money and where they're not, and impacts to everything from airline industry to hospitality industry to certainly apparel, fitness, travel has been massive, and is going to take some time, certainly in some of those segments, to return to sort of the pre-COVID status. On the flip side, we've seen significant sometimes sort of panic buying in foodstuffs and grocery items and DIY items and other segments. Now, obviously, as we start to see certain regions open up and provide a little bit more opportunities, we're starting to certainly see a gradual return to other trends. But the impact was significant and almost immediate across a number of these sectors. So what does that mean from just an overall investment standpoint across sort of the core technologies that we would categorize as auto ID? And I won't go into the individual numbers in too great a detail, but across the board, with the exception of perhaps RFID, we are expecting fairly sizable contraction in terms of spend in 2020 across, again, all of the data capture and label printing and computing product segments that are associated with the auto ID space. Clearly, there are sectors or industries that have been more vulnerable. As I said before, in retail, grocery, DIY, e-commerce have been especially dynamic, whereas sort of traditional apparel based retail and certainly department store-style retail establishments have been challenged. Manufacturing, again here, automotive, energy sectors are ones that suffered quite significantly, whereas CPG, food and beverage, logistics spaces, were fairly robust and actually offered some very interesting opportunities. Healthcare as well, obviously, is worth mentioning. Our expectation is, again, going into or taking into account the fundamentals of what the headwinds were going into 2020, taking into account the expectation that once some of these shelter-in-place mandates are lifted and there's a little bit more freedom to movement, I don't think we're going to immediately return to sort of quote unquote the way things were. I think there will be a lasting impact across a number of sectors, but we do see, and we are seeing, the signs of sort of a rebound emerging. There's obviously a lot of debate as to, is this a V-shaped rebound? Is this a sort of a W-shaped rebound? And I think there's sufficient debate and discussion around that. We fundamentally believe that there will be a protracted or a longer term impact, so it won't be an immediate recovery, but we do at the same time or are anticipating in 2021 a return to growth across all of these segments, and these are sort of our baseline assumptions. Some of they're certainly the best case scenarios might extend beyond that, but we are anticipating, going into 2021, obviously coming off of a very difficult 2020, we are anticipating and we are seeing sort of renewed investments. And again, a lot of that is certainly based on sort of the strength of a lot of these spaces going into this year, the demand and development of a number of mandates and initiatives and modernization requirements across the technology base going into 2021. Clearly a strong second wave that leads to lockdowns in the second half of the year or in Q4 will have an adverse impact on this and could change that outlook quite significantly. But so far we haven't seen seen in our research suggestions that will take place. So while 2020 will be a struggle and will continue to be a struggle overall, we do and we are expecting a rebound come 2021. I put this slide up here not necessarily because it serves as significant guidance or as a very strong model for what's happening right now, but just for perspective, I think, in terms of what we saw happen in terms of auto ID technology investment during the Great Recession about a decade ago. And here again, going into it, we were in 2007, very strong growth, double digits or low teens in terms of spend, and then followed by almost 10% contraction, and then a very significant contraction in 2009, and then again getting out of it 2010, a very strong rebound. So while this was over 2 years, I think the indication in terms of the speed of the rebound is certainly interesting. So just getting into some of the technologies and then some of the sectors in terms of what we're seeing, and I won't necessarily sort of address each and every point, but a couple of themes I think are worth mentioning. So certainly across sort of the traditional data capture scanning technology estates, we have been in the midst of an upgrade cycle to camera-based technology, imager-based technology for the last several years, and that's certainly in grocery at the point of sale, as well as throughout supply chain, throughout manufacturing organizations, the warehouse environments as well. The value and the performance of image-based technology, both in terms of its ability to decode a wider variety of codes, but also can also be more multifunctional in terms of OCR capabilities and the like, have been a real catalyst behind that transition. Certainly are seeing around sort of the consumer side, greater adoption of mobile barcode reading solutions for a variety of payments, for a variety of customer engagements, for a variety of self-scanning types of applications. So we do certainly anticipate that to continue. In addition to the expansion of just vision-based technology and integration of vision-based solutions to address things like loss prevention, to address things like item identification. So we're seeing some really innovative things happen, around that, and a lot of that now, in the context of what retail looks like today, also warrants mention around contactless and certainly self-service initiatives that, in part, were underway going into 2020, but I think as we rethink retail, will take on certainly new meaning. In terms of the print, the output, label printing side of things, there are certainly a number of initiatives underway. Some of the things that we've heard more interest in of late is as we are seeing greater demand for unique identification, for serialization, for encoding, again, sort of unique data on an item level basis. The demand for verification solutions and validation solutions to support these serialization efforts is certainly increasing. So we're seeing some interesting innovation happening there, both on the sort of online and on-demand printing side. Certainly higher resolution and demand for sort of smaller barcodes for serialization efforts in various segments such as electronics or automotive or pharmaceuticals is also driving some interesting sort of dynamics on the printing side. With regard to RFID, I mean, again, the big success story around RFID, or here specifically passive UHF or RAIN RFID, has been certainly the apparel sector, and has been sort of the continued sort of rollout and adoption by some very large retailers, including ones starting last year with some new initiatives. So we do expect that to continue. We do expect sort of the use case for RFID in a lot of these retail environments to also expand from inventory control into loss prevention and potentially even checkout type applications. We are seeing expansion into a number of different use cases, from certainly fresh foods to logistics types of applications for a variety of cross-docking to real-time location tracking applications within large facilities. So we are certainly seeing some very interesting dynamics that, in part, I think will, outside of some of the access to capital issues, will receive a boost from some of the dynamics that we're going through right now. And then on the modal computing side, the real sort of the big theme going into 2020 has been around application modernization, shift to Android, shift to touch-based solutions. I'll have a slide later on in terms of where we still see a lot of that transition still happening, but certainly in retail, certainly in logistics markets and delivery markets, we've seen some very significant investments going into 2020, and those will now extend into, I would say, warehouse environments and other spaces to satisfy that migration, that modernization effort. Certainly, we're seeing here, some of the requirements is, around the notion of shared devices, and this really extends across the entire sort of portfolio of products. But the notion of disinfection and sterilization is one that is receiving a lot of attention for obvious reasons. Certainly, we've seen some interesting interesting solutions around using sensor-based technology to determine distance and social distancing to ensure that people are operating in a safe way. And I think there's just a greater emphasis around the mobile worker, the frontline worker, the essential worker that we didn't have before, perhaps going into this. And so that realization of the importance of the retail workforce and the warehouse workforce and delivery workers, and obviously healthcare workers as well, is I think certainly driving sort of renewed focus. I mean, part of it is labor still is a very significant cost, or has a significant cost impact, but then also certainly around safety and support and workforce management are themes that we think have certainly picked up a lot of momentum. So I'm going to go through a couple of sort of industry vignettes, and I know that these are a little bit of eye charts, but again, these slides will be made available. So the intent isn't to go through each point on here, but to sort of paint a picture of what we see happening across these industries. So retail is obviously an interesting one to start with. Going into 2020, the emphasis around retail strategies was certainly around, for traditional in-store at least, around the checkout process and facilitating a faster checkout, facilitating greater checkout options, looking to synchronize channels. Certainly on the promotional standpoint, electronic couponing was, were areas where we're certainly seeing investment as well. And one of the things that has been clear and really what's, in a certain way exposed as a result of COVID-19 is retailers that, and it's, this should come as no surprise, but retailers with good visibility into their operations, in particular into their physical retail stores, are ones that have been best positioned to not necessarily weather the storm, but to respond and be more agile in their response to different shopping habits. And clearly here, what this meant for retailers that were allowed to stay open, this has meant a shift to curbside, to home delivery services, to using retail facilities as fulfillment centers. Those that don't have a good idea of what they have in their store or where it is are just going to be hard pressed to do this very efficiently, and it's going to lead to certainly a lot of dissatisfaction in terms of the customer or consumer experience. So we've certainly seen that. We've certainly seen a shift in online and delivery expectations and across all customer segments, but in particular amongst those in perhaps the 50+ age demographic, as well as obviously in grocery, which in the past has been one where e-commerce really hasn't impacted it to the extent that other product segments have. So we've seen a massive increase of 30, 40, 50% in e-commerce volume amongst grocers that they really weren't prepared for and didn't anticipate. A lot of especially small and medium sized businesses were hard pressed to roll out curbside pickup options, and we're looking to sort of their technology partners to help them do that. The one challenge here that we see that really is going to be something that will need to be addressed coming out of COVID-19 is the profit challenges as retailers have been rolling out sort of these various sort of shopping and delivery options to satisfy demand, and this is particularly acute in sort of the grocery sector where margins are so thin, and we've certainly heard from the larger retailers that their margin expectations for 2020 are going to suffer as a result of this. But adding the delivery costs, the labor associated with that is something that organizations are going to need to face and need to address moving forward, especially as we look at the profitability of different fulfillment channels, and try to balance that from a sort of a business continuity perspective. As I said before, I think that this focus on the frontline workforce, and in particular in retail, but also in other segments, has really come to the fore, and ensuring certainly health and continuity in areas like food supply chain has sort of driven this new class of essential workers. So the emphasis on enabling that workforce, on training that workforce, on ensuring that workforce is safe, have been areas that have been a particular focus for a lot of organizations. As I said before, emphasis on visibility. This is going to be a long-term impact. And I think this will be in many ways a catalyst and accelerant to driving demand for increased item level visibility. Again, not necessarily across every product segment; it's hard to do, but certainly as a strategy moving forward amongst within retailers, and that can be satisfied certainly across a number of different types of technology classes. Self-service and contactless. Contactless seems to be sort of the buzzword of the quarter, at least. Finding ways to do things with distance is certainly are areas where I think there's been some innovation around. I think it's hard to tell how long that this requirement will last, but I think certainly for the foreseeable future, contactless will be certainly something that needs to be addressed. And then also on the supply chain side, supply chain realignment. One thing that we certainly did see is the forecasting algorithms that a lot of retailers and brand partners were using just weren't sufficiently prepared for this level of disruption, this level of panic buying, and really relied on historical trends more so than other indicators. So I think that the use of AI and more sophisticated ways to anticipate demand is certainly are other areas where we're seeing increased investment. So from a supply chain standpoint, what are we seeing? Again, here this is just the chart here just reflects expectations in terms of sectoral output on a global basis across some of the key sort of key product segments. With 2021 seeing a rebound in terms of output, in terms of growth. But certainly, we see large firms looking to diversify. Now we're going to have maybe a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction, but certainly strategy around diversification outside of relying on areas like China for their supply chain, for their manufacturing. So shifting to Vietnam, to Mexico, to India, and manufacturing hubs within those countries are likely to benefit from that shift. I think there's going to be some organizations that are going to look to repatriate some production for sure, and that will grow with the likes of certainly automation and small batch production. So those trends we do anticipate as well. As I said before a couple of times, traceability and serialization efforts extending beyond what we've seen in pharmaceutical and some other product segments into the food supply chain in a much more aggressive way. And really now we're seeing especially services being rolled out to match food service distributors with excess capacity, food retailers and wholesalers that require additional resources. So being able to balance that and match that in real time is something that's important. Capacity strain on last mile delivery services. That's that I guess is sort of a natural consequence of the rapid shift that we've seen in buying habits. And as a result, also within delivery services, sort of an increased push towards paperless processes and digital services. And that's sometimes as simple as when delivering an item to a doorstep or to a customer, instead of looking for them to use their finger to tap the screen to sign for it. We've seen some innovative use of mobile scanning a QR code to confirm delivery verification. So again, introducing sort of that contactless aspect to the delivery scenario. In the warehouse, which is obviously a significant area of investment or environment for investment in auto ID technology. Here we're certainly seeing efforts around employee productivity, efficiencies around fulfillment and reduction of errors. Those were and have been sort of the key points of emphasis in terms of warehouse operations already going into this. I think this is only being exacerbated or accelerated as a result of sort of the pressures around same-day shipping and fulfillment speeds in general to improve sort of their overall operations. And this is again where the workforce is so critical and also represents a significant portion of sort of operational expenses. And we've seen here I would say a renewed commitment to the whole cycle of onboarding, of training, of retraining, of driving safety, and delivering the right tools to those workers, as opposed to in the past. Finding the labor has been a challenge. And we saw Amazon hire, I think, in excess of 100,000 people within a 2-month period. So that access to qualified labor and the training and the retention of that labor and the safety of that labor is are areas where we're seeing certainly a greater piece of emphasis put around. As well as it's just overall operations within these facilities. And one of the themes that we were certainly tracking going into this year, as I mentioned before, is sort of this modernization efforts around Android or around mobile and adoption of Android. The warehouse environment has lagged other segments when we look at sort of Android adoption, and there's a lot of when we think about the sort of the installed base of legacy devices, a majority of that is in warehouse environments. So with Windows CE reaching end of extended service life over the past year, I think the emphasis to upgrade, but also to upgrade, with the thinking of oftentimes modernizing workflows or rethinking workflows is certainly starting to happen in the warehouse environment, and I think will be a catalyst. Again, a little bit softer in 2020, but going into 2021, certainly a significant driver. And then finally on healthcare. Healthcare is a market that certainly has, I would say, had all the key ingredients, has always had all the key ingredients in terms of sort of mission critical operations, in terms of a very highly mobile workforce, in terms of need for sort of accuracy to prevent errors, yet has been one that has been, I would say maybe fickle is a good way of describing sort of their investment appetite in newer technologies. And we've seen a lot of, over the past, a lot of waste in terms of efficiencies and time caregivers or spend, in a patient-facing capacity as opposed to, running around looking for stuff, for example. So healthcare, is a market, especially now where there's been, so much emphasis on, supporting not only the surge of cases, but also the, doing so in a highly safe way to prevent the spread. I mean, it's been a really, really challenging time for sort of the healthcare sector and the services they provide. So what we've seen as a result of this certainly is, explosion of telehealth services as hospitals essentially shut down for general routines and doctors' offices as well. Telehealth services, which has been emerging for some time, really started to take off, and we saw much greater acceptance and usage on telehealth services. So rolling out turnkey solutions, including billing and coding and remote monitoring and mobile telehealth triage solutions, is an area where we've certainly seen increased interest and increased demand. The need to stand up remote testing and sort of support these distributed healthcare service options during crises has been something that we've seen a lot of organizations, quickly develop solutions around. And again, sort of the ability to identify and track patients and be able to do that with scale in some very different conditions and do it in a safe way has introduced. We've seen a lot of innovation around different ways that technology vendors have looked to support their healthcare customers in doing that. And I think that again will drive as we move out of this sort of current period of crisis and the pandemic, will accelerate digital efforts in healthcare environments even beyond what we've seen so far. And again, that's especially around sort of the patient journey, everything from check-in to service to to medication delivery, to specimen management, all over those areas where auto ID technology already has a footprint. I think we'll just continue to see that broadening as a result of sort of the awareness that's being drawn to this sector right now. So just a couple of points on, and I know that Michael had mentioned this opportunity for some Q&A if there are questions that you guys want to post in the chat windows. But just a couple of sort of higher level observations about coming out of this, and what are the what can solution providers do to sort of best align with organizations and their needs during times that are, again, very challenging, certainly also from the access to capital to make some of these investments. And the one theme, or one of the themes that certainly has bubbled to the top for us is sort of this sort of this emergence of this essential frontline mobile workforce, and maybe it's wrong of me to call it an emergence. I mean, these were always workers that have been identified as essential to the business and to operations, but I think in the past they've been underserved, especially when it comes to getting them the right tools to do their jobs as effectively as they need to, providing them with the right training, and ensuring the sort of safety of that workforce. So I think that that's certainly having renewed emphasis. Sort of the acceleration around digital services and emphasis on operational visibility. And this really has to be done. The biggest challenge here that we've seen, with this over the years is shared value across, starting with the brand owners all the way through supply chain distribution as well as retail. And here we're talking about, sort of source coding and sort of the requirements and the investments to be able to support that. So there needs to be shared value across that ecosystem for this to fully work, as opposed to, because most of these operate in sort of open loop supply chains. But we are seeing certainly an acceleration happen for and I would say this is for the most part concentrated in sort of tier 1 or larger tier 1 retailers and some of their brand partners. But I think this will also trickle down into sort of the mid market for their, as they look to also be able to operate in a much more agile fashion. The last mile cost of service challenges, especially around labor. I mean, we've certainly seen in Wuhan they rolled out a lot of sort of robotic delivery services, and while automation and robotics are certainly interesting to address some of the last mile challenges, I'd say they're far from ready for prime time yet. So really addressing sort of those last mile cost of service challenges is going to be something, especially in some of the retail segments, such as grocery, as we anticipate there's going to be a shift in shopping habits, even coming out of COVID-19. The demand for right now in terms of there's some very acute pain points that need to be addressed. I mean, how can I quickly create sort of curbside checkout solutions? How can I quickly address a telehealth triage requirement? How can I ensure safety of workers in a warehouse environment, including things like social distancing? So there's these sort of mini apps, if you will, that are starting to pop up, and so we've seen some solution providers sort of create these sort of packaged solutions that are very digestible and quite frankly easy to deploy to sort of address those very near-term pain points. And I think that especially in the mid-market, that we're certainly seeing a lot of that. And then finally, as a result of sort of just the overall economic impact and access to capital and just general investment climate, there as always there's demand for or interest in alternative deployment support models, and the one that sort of naturally comes up and is sort of this managed service model that we certainly see greater interest in. But I think that flexibility around certainly payment, flexibility around adoption and support, especially with some of the IT support staffs sort of operating a little bit on shoestring sort of workforces are areas where where organizations are starting to look for sort of increased support, increased help. So probably went a little bit longer than I initially intended to, but just quickly on VDC Research, I've got a couple of slides, and Michael's going to turn it back over to Michael. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, just a very quick introduction. We are a full-service technology research firm. I myself am responsible for managing two of our practice areas that cover automatic identification and enterprise mobility, and then the other two practice areas that we have are IoT and embedded technology, as well as industrial automation and sensing. And the way that we work with our clients are through a variety of access to sort of syndicated research services, as well as thought leadership and more sort of customized research engagements. So if you do have any questions about some of those services, feel free to certainly reach out or to myself, and I'll try to answer those questions or pass you along to someone better equipped to answer those questions. But I'm going to hand it over to Michael and see if there are any questions that came in from the group.
Yeah, David, once again, thank you for your time and insights today. We do have some questions, so we can go ahead and get started with those if you're ready.
Yep.
First question we have is if you could talk a little bit about how you collect the data, how many companies are surveyed, or how are these opportunities quantified?
Sure, that's a great question. So there's a number of different methodologies that we apply when doing our research. First of all, there is a significant primary research effort that supports any number of our research engagements, whether it's for sort of syndicated or published content or for more sort of customized engagements. So we start with the vendor community and we talk to within the product categories that we track. We talk to as many vendors as possible and collect data as well as insights from them in terms of how they're seeing development. So depending on the product category, I mean, we can be talking from anywhere from 5 to 10 vendors upwards of 20 to 25 vendors for a particular research report. But we don't stop there. Based on our knowledge of how these solutions ultimately get deployed and integrated, we spend a fair amount of time also talking to solution providers, be that distributors or systems integrators or ISVs, to understand sort of their perspective. And then finally, on the end user side, on the sort of technology decision maker side, we do that's where we do more sort of survey work to get a larger sample size, and so we're doing surveys of organizations across the globe with sample sizes from anywhere from as little as 100 to 200 respondents, and sometimes upwards of 1,000 plus respondents.
Okay, thank you. Another question we received is why do you think some sectors like transportation and utilities have seemed to have little change in their outlook compared to some of the others?
So I mean, the transportation sector. I mean, again, writ large, obviously the airline industry is within transportation has been hit particularly acute, and so within that, there certainly has been disruption. But on the same side, the sort of delivery services area of transportation has there's been increased demand for that, and quite frankly, some capacity constraints in terms of that utility services and some of the other sort of what we would consider sort of mission critical services. Obviously, the energy sector, from the standpoint of energy production, has been hard hit just based on some of the energy pricing trends that we've seen recently. But just in terms of utility services and equipping workers to support infrastructure and provide and maintain that infrastructure, those have been able to, I guess, withstand some of the some of this this downward pressure.
Okay, great. Another question we received is, where do you see the biggest growth for RFID in fresh food?
So I mean, the biggest growth or biggest demand for RFID, right now is certainly in, and continues to be in the apparel sector, for sure. But we are starting to see demand for fresh food delivery and supply chain in a variety of hospitality segments, as we've seen some shifts happen there in terms of changes to menus and changes to habits and consumption habits in there. So fresh food is especially acute, and making sure that that we can track it, making sure that we have visibility, and if there needs to be a recall, if there's something that happens, that we're sort of have the pinpoint accuracy. That's all sort of combined to driving sort of increased interest for RFID technology for that type of an application, including sort of sensor fusion with things like temperature monitoring, etc.
And do you see any government regulations around requiring visibility?
So we have seen certainly mandates. As I mentioned in the talk, we saw over the last couple of years in Russia, for example, and maybe it's a bit of an outlier here, but strong mandates starting with tobacco, and now going into sort of other product segments, such as apparel and footwear, as well as things like fur coats. And also obviously alcohol products. So we do see those sort of government-led mandates come across. I mean, they still happen sort of in pockets, but we are certainly seeing as organizations are looking to introduce sort of safety and security and transparency, as well as address some of the counterfeiting and also to drive taxation efforts. We are seeing governments become a little bit more interested in rolling out those requirements. And sometimes it's a bit of a balancing act between sort of government-led regulation as opposed to sort of de facto industry-led sort of regulation and mandates that bubble up from, say, a large tier 1 organization, say, this is the way we're going to do things, and it sort of trickles across. But we certainly are seeing in certain country markets governments take a more proactive approach.
Okay, thanks. And someone had just asked, there will be a recording available here in the next coming days. So everyone that registered, you will be getting a notification of when that recording is available to download. And we'll end here with one last question for you, David. And that is, was there any of these outlooks that surprised you, and why?
Any of these outlooks that surprised me? I mean, I guess the most interesting sort of development for us, and again, it's right now, we'll see what happens as a result of once we get sort of through the next half a year or 12 to 18 months, is sort of the lasting impact on decision making. And right now we're obviously seeing sort of reactions to sort of the current environment, and sort of trying to quickly respond, and as businesses have, and some have done a better job than others. So the surprise will for me will come maybe in 6 to 12 months to see how lasting some of these impacts are, and some of these things are. Our assumption is that even though right now the overall investment climate and the sort of general demand is challenging, we do see a lot of what's happening in terms of its impact on the broader auto ID market and demand for some of the capabilities that auto ID technologies bring to the fore as a catalyst, and maybe a springboard for some of the efforts that were already underway, but drive greater even greater sort of focus and resources towards that. So we won't know until a year from now to see exactly how lasting that will be. The other, I mean, I guess surprise probably not so much, but it was interesting to see in the grocery segment how quickly, organizations, or I mean, how quickly consumers were, shifted to sort of online purchasing habits, but also were willing to accept really substandard quality of service when thinking about just the reality of empty shelves and ordering stuff that, with delivery windows that, are maybe 3, 4, 5 days, if not a week or two down the road, oftentimes only getting 60% of the items that you're looking to purchase. So something that would never fly in sort of normal conditions. I think the tolerance for that, I think, allowed a lot of organizations to experiment and to fine tune sort of these services. So that was certainly, I guess, an interesting outgrowth.
Okay, great. Thank you again, David, for your time and information.
Thanks everyone for spending the last hour with us, and hope everyone has a good rest of the day and a good weekend.
And David, we also have AIM's Contact Us slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep, no problem.
So.
And I also want to thank our sponsors again: Applied Image, Avery Dennison, Aware Innovations, Bartender by Seagull Scientific, Blue Star, and FAG Electronics. Thank you for your support of AIM. And as you see on this last slide here, if you're interested in contacting us about any of our AIM initiatives, you can visit aimglobal.org or email us at info@aimglobal.org. Call us at 724-742-4470. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.